The mindset of thinking the answer to my problems is if I can put another zero on my revenue. I can go from 10 million to 100 million, 3 million to 30 million, whatever it is. If that is what your mindset is telling you, there is a very good chance that you are already slipped of these doom loops.
Welcome to Escape the CEO Doom Loop, where we talk with real-world leaders about how to build great companies without losing your clarity, energy, or sanity. I'm Glenn Dahl, joined by my host, John Ninkovich. Our guest today is a real pleasure. I've been looking forward to this guest, Brad Giles. So Brad, thanks for being here. Brad is a serial entrepreneur, a seasoned leadership coach, and the founder of Evolution Partners. Brad has built and exited fast growth companies, twice landing in the BRW Fast 100. Before shifting gears to coach CEOs across Australia and beyond. He's authored 3 books, Made to Thrive, Onboarded, and most recently, Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. Each focused on helping leaders scale with strategy, discipline, and purpose. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn and John. It's great to be here.
Awesome to have you. So Brad, your path from operator to advisor gives you a perspective about this whole doom loop concept, which we hatched about 3 years ago after doing a research project with 72 CEOs across the world about what were the things that they were challenged with. And this whole doom loop was one of the concepts that we saw in the data. And so that's been the evolution of this. Before we get into that, can you give us just a background on kind of your journey from running businesses over time to your work as a coach and an author and kind of what that all looks like for our listeners?
I'm going to quote Mark Cuban, who said that a business is the most competitive sport. I've been in trouble. I started getting in trouble in school for trying to run a business when I was in primary school, which is, I guess, year 6 kind of thing. And I've just always been fascinated by it. I've found it deeply rewarding. And, I think that entrepreneurship has the ability to change the trajectory of someone's life in a positive, and I'll kind of put in brackets, negative way also, more than anything else perhaps within reason. So yeah, I've always been fascinated by and my work and hobby as being an entrepreneur. Started several companies along the way. Some of them have gone really well, some of them less so, but about 2009 or 10, I started coaching CEOs in a full-time capacity, I guess I'd say.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. One of the things I've been dying to talk to you about is I just really love it how in the recent book, Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. And you use Jim Collins' flywheel concept, right? The flywheel and the doom loop in each of those chapters. I really liked how you did that and how you like that terminology. And John and I had talked about when we did this study and we wrote what we called then the CEO playbook around the concept of what we saw as the CEO doom loop from that data. So for you, if you go back to yourself in your entrepreneurial role and your business leader role before you became a business coach, did you recognize this concept of the doom loop that you might have found yourself in? And if so, maybe looking backwards, was there a time that you were definitely in that?
At the time, no, but I had become quite an expert at mastering surfing down a doom loop, that's for sure. And I guess I didn't set out to write a book that contained doom loops and flywheels. So the context for the readers, very briefly, so I can come back to your question, Glenn, is there are 4 areas plus 1: better team, better customers, better offering, better financials, and then finally a better life by design. So I really started off saying, what is the problem that I've endured myself and I've seen through clients and friends? And that is that people try to build a bigger business and they try to put another zero on their revenue and then they sacrifice everything, but also they get into trouble along the way because they make poor decisions. Now, that's where it really started off. And then I can still remember where I was sitting, and I think I was working on the better teams section, and I just realized, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's what I'm building here is a flywheel and a doom loop. And then it just kind of clicked. And then as soon as I looked at that, within 5 or 10 minutes, I analyzed the work I'd done in the other chapters, and I was like, oh, that's it. It's really obvious that people make a decision that they're going toward a doom loop or they're going toward a flywheel, and it is the
Mm-hmm.
mindset. It is the mindset that's underlying that helps you to make the better decision. So did I answer your question there, Glenn?
Not quite, but you did talk about how you incorporated in the
Yeah.
book. Here's the follow-up question then, Brad, is can you tell us a story about a time when you, as a head of company in your entrepreneur days, you were in a doom loop?
Yeah.
Did you recognize it then?
Yeah. And it's hard to not talk through the lens of bigger isn't better, because that's the way that I am, that I've been spending so much of my time because I've been talking about the book because it just came out. In terms of the doom loop, I've found that I've been in that situation when I've been growing fast. So at
Mhm.
one point, I remember distinctly, I was growing at 85, 90% per annum, and it was exciting and fun, and my ego loved it, and it was as challenging as you'd imagine. We live with fast growth companies regularly, so it's not unusual in a sense, but yeah, it was pretty damaging all around. There was a lot of things that happened. It was very hard to hold on to people, and people were excited to join us, but it was hard to hold on to them. There was a lot of challenges. Yeah.
So, kind of going back to that period of your life when you're growing that fast, that's interesting. So you talked about kind of losing people, and it's kind of like you're trying to hold it all together, right? It's hard as you do that. So it's exciting and stressful, and you're kind of on the treadmill all the time. So I guess talk about that point in your life, and then how do you get to the point where you come up with the idea and the concept of writing the book, bigger isn't better, better is better. What's the connection translation between those things for you?
Ah, I guess it's been pattern recognition. So I go back to that
Mm,
point, kind of drawing the tail on Glenn's question. And it was the people, but it was my health. It was the offering. We were very much trying to provide good product, good service, but it's just very, very hard when you've got so many people joining, when you've got so many balls in the air at once. And really, we didn't have levels of competence at levels of management that were necessary, and probably experience. So there was
mm,
a lot of things that played into that. To your question, John, it was my own experience. The thing that I've said many times is a two-parter, which is it's a love letter that's written to clients, friends, people that we know. The second part is that it's written, the ink is metaphorically written from the blood, sweat, and tears of all the people that I've known along the journey, and in a
Mhm.
significant part myself. And so, you know, there's the old adage that we often talk about in this domain of hiring A players, for example. I remember many years ago, 2005, coming across the A player concept, and I was like, this is brilliant, and top grading and taking
Mhm.
multiple hours to hire. And it started to work almost instantly, which was fantastic. But it wasn't in my mindset or nature, because the media, the society, my personality, everything was telling me I had to get really big really quickly.
mm.
Mm.
That's interesting. So can you talk about this? I'd love to get your perspective on this because I think totally your book is fascinating. And I run into this with clients a lot. And, one of the things in my conversations with clients is that you have to grow, right? I think that the essence of running a business, you have to grow. And we constantly have these conversations with them around what does growth really look like, right? The right growth. And, one of the reasons I think growth is so important for businesses is we look at talent, which is the lifeblood and the engine of every company that we all work with, right? Irrespective of industry. If we're not growing our company, we're really not creating opportunities for people to grow in the organization and take on additional opportunity. And so we kind of have a hole in our bucket, right? So we'll see talent if we're not growing the company smartly. We have a hole in our bucket. And so we lose talent to greener pastures where somebody else has figured it out and they're creating more opportunity. So can you kind of unwind that a little bit as you think about the book? And I think some of these concepts that I kind of just mentioned probably tie tightly into some of the things you're talking about when you think about, bigger is better, better is better, what that looks like.
Book title is not bigger isn't better, smaller is better. Right. And that's a really important book because this is a
Yeah.
book about the mindset of compounding. So how do I build a team that compounds and customers that compound, an offering that compounds and financials that compounds so that I can have a better life by design? So it's not a book about frameworks. The other books that I'd written were very much prescriptive. The 5 Roles of a CEO was how to be a better CEO. Onboarded was how to hire and onboard new people. But this is not prescriptive. It's a book about mindset and the mindset of thinking the answer to my problems is if I can put another zero on my revenue. I can go from 10 million to 100 million, 3 million to 30 million, whatever it is contextually. Right. If that is what your mindset is telling you, there is a very good chance that you are or have already slipped into or are in a series of these doom loops through team, customers, offering financials. And it's a massive waste of energy and effort. So it is about building a better business. Between the lines of your question, very early on in the book, I have a loose definition of compounding, which is imagine if your revenues grew greater than 15% per year whilst achieving employee attrition of less than 15% per year. And then thirdly, a net profit percentage of greater than 15% per year. And you could hold it within those constraints year after year after year. And I've sat with owners who said, in 7 years, we'd be $100 million company. That's remarkable, but we'd have the profit and so forth. So it is very much about the concept of compounding and the mindset of compounding.
Love that.
Yeah, that was Brad. When I read the book, I really liked that. I mean, there's a lot of concepts in there I really liked, but that 15, 15, 15 is one that I really liked, and I've already been sharing that with my clients because I think it talks about controlled growth, but it also talks to your point. It's never about what's that end financial number, because if we focus on just building a better company and we do it for the right reasons by doing the right things, we can't help but, to use the flywheel language, but really to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that's the frustrating thing, I guess, intellectually about people who talk about flywheels is they don't use that phrase, we can't help but, because it must be a natural consequence when you're talking about a flywheel.
Yeah.
If we do that, that will be the natural consequence. We struggle with these things, right? What can I say? Yeah, but it is about compounding. I think that there has been entrepreneurship doesn't do what it says on the tin. That's the thing that really began to eat away at me as I was beginning to form the thoughts of this book. And, people lose their marriage, they lose their house, some people get sick, and that's just the beginning. There are so many things that can go wrong, and it's hard, right? But don't get me wrong, it's terribly exciting and rewarding as well, but it just doesn't need to be that way. That really led me to think, well, why is that? Why is it that we end up in this situation? And I touched on this, but this is the pressure for bigger. So how do we get into this situation? So I've got to preface that by saying people who are chasing larger revenue numbers, but they think that bigger is the answer to everything, fall into this trap of being impatient and undisciplined. Impatient and undisciplined, right? So that is what I call or label the impulsive risk taker, which I am a ninja expert at, right? I've done that really, really, really well and worked very hard to control those impulsive, that risk taker instincts of being undisciplined and leaders. But the way that I did that in 2003 was reading a book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which was the preceded to Scaling Up, which, as we know, was the preceded in a way, or the good work from Metronome and Metronomics and 3HAG and so forth. So it is the framework that really helped that. I think that it really begins with understanding, how do we get into this situation? Very few people would be silly enough to put a 2x2 matrix on page 10 of their book, right? But this is the essence. This is how we get into this situation. And then how do we get there is the pressure. I mentioned this before. It's the pressure from society, where society focus on everything being bigger, bigger buildings, S&P 500, Inc. 5000, you name it. Everything in society is about being bigger.
Yeah.
There is also your DNA. There's evidence that your DNA makes you have a higher propensity to risk. And then thirdly, your psychology. So there's traits in your psychology. So as entrepreneurs, we can be focusing on bigger.
It's funny, Brett, I feel like you're almost talking to me. And, I'd actually joined a company. This was in 2012. I joined a staffing company, ended up becoming the president of the company. And one of the reasons I joined is the CEO, who was a good friend of mine, had this vision of becoming a $100 million company. So his BHAG was really around being a $100 million company. And this was in an 8-year time frame. So when I joined, we were, 25 million, something like that. What was really fascinating is a couple of years into it, I'm like, this isn't working, because I just felt like we were so in search of the $100 million target, right? Which meant this year's got to be X, and next year, if it's got to be Y, and Z, and these numbers were astronomical to get to that. And I felt like we were really compromising on talent, and we had such a need to bring people in order to achieve those numbers that it became really difficult to control the culture. I find enough good people fast enough for us to be able to really put that together really well to be able to achieve those goals. So after a couple of years of trying to do that, and it was something that we celebrated all the time. Like, we had a North Star in the office and we were measuring ourselves against it. Every whole company, that was the goal. Every division tied into that goal. But after a couple of years of doing it, we had to take a different perspective on it, because we started to almost stagnate a bit, because we just couldn't get right. I think a lot of the things we need to talk about compounding, because we're going and searching for the number, trying to get to the number faster. And I think we could have got there, but the way we did it, it didn't compound appropriately. So it's interesting as you're describing that. I lived that whole experience, and it was hard. And it's interesting is we lost a lot of good people kind of going through that process too, because you're churning them. It's not good enough. It's never good enough. And you're on this treadmill all the time. And it wear people out.
I am going to quote Albert Einstein, who said that compounding is the eighth wonder of the world,
Yeah.
and you either pay it or you earn it. Now, I'm all for big, hairy, audacious goals. 3 or 4 work days ago, I was with a company, and we set a BHAG for a $10 billion market cap. That is in some way inspired by the compounding work that we're doing and that we're talking about here. It's about building teams of A players, autonomous independence, retaining the soul. There's a lot of those kind of things that are from this book that are inspiring that. So I'm all for big goals, but what you've described there, John, is the difference between just going for bigger. Let's just go for a big number, because then my neighbors will like me. Then the people who I don't care about down at the club will be impressed. Yeah. All of the things that our ego tells us, right? Yeah. And it's all hollow behind that. And that's my point. Yeah. Instead, if you're building a compounding business that is deeply connected to a life by design, that is perhaps what you really want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great perspective.
I'm glad you brought up the life by design, because I really liked the last chapter in the book. And how you referenced that there was a couple of things about it. I'm a big fan of Peter Attia and that whole concept of, I call it flattening the curve, right?
Yep. Health span versus lifespan.
Yes. But also I think you had come up with this phrase, it stuck with me from the podcast, was something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to. Can you expand on what that means?
So just to zoom out for a sec, if you get these 4 flywheels turning and you avoid those doom loops, so you're building a business that's compounding through better team, better offering, better customers, better financials. it enables you to have the freedom. And that's why entrepreneurs start is part of my thesis. That's why entrepreneurs start is for freedom. It gives you the freedom to build and design a better life by design. The better life by design goes through 5 areas, which is healthy, wealthy, wise, happy, and great family. So you've zoned in on happy, which is one of the concepts within there is a quick temperature check. I heard it many years ago and I tried to find any source that I could and I just couldn't. But I just remember someone said it to me and I don't know what book it's from. I'd love to be able to attribute it to someone, but I know that I didn't come up with it. But I was just in an entrepreneurs organization conversation one day and someone said this and I wrote it down and it stuck with me. And that is, what is the quick and dirty measure of, am I in a state of happiness today? And that is, do I have something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to?
Okay.
Right? So if you're missing the last one, book a holiday, for example. So I got something to do and I've got someone to love, but I don't have anything to look forward to. Well, that simple little thing may be a problem. And I've used it, I guess, over 20 years really to sense check against my own state of mind, for want of a better sense. And I'm like, well, I'm working way too hard. I'm not really seeing my partner and I don't have a holiday. Maybe there's something in that. So I instead can bring that back as just a nice, simple happiness measure.
I love that.
Fantastic.
It's simple. It's really simple and easy to look at. Hey, am I doing this or not? And what adjustments do I need to make? Right. It's really around quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. There may be some deeper issues there, but just a nice quick sense check.
Yeah. So Brad, for our listeners, can you kind of just give a brief overview of each of the 4 flywheels so they can get a little bit better perspective of kind of the foundation of the book?
Yeah, for sure. I want to preface this by just expanding on, I mentioned discipline and patience in a 2x2. Undisciplined and impatient leaders are impulsive risk takers. Now, the job to be done overall to go from bigger to better is to become a strategic executor. It is much easier to do that when you learn from other people's mistakes rather than undertaking those mistakes yourself, which is get a coach. Yeah. So when you are disciplined and patient, you're a strategic executor. You know the story, right? Get a coach, learn from other people's mistakes rather than your own. So there is 4 doom loops, 4 flywheels. I want to just explain them briefly. Just jump in and stop at each one if that's okay.
Yeah. Great.
Yep.
The first one is the bigger team doom loop. So when you're focused on bigger, you think, I've got to hire more people, build it when they will come, those types of things. So what do? You hire B and C players to fill roles quickly. There are many experts at doing this all around the world, right? But what happens is you form dysfunctional and unproductive teams. You can't help but form dysfunctional and unproductive teams. You haven't spent the time hiring. What then happens is you experience low efficiency and they focus on low impact work and you therefore achieve poor results. So you misinterpret those poor results with your mindset to grow bigger. So you push for growth to solve problems and you hire more B and C players. So that's the better teams doom loop very, very briefly. And what happens is the only answer is we've got to hire more people. And unless something shocks you out of that, you tend to get stuck in there. So what I've really tried to do is make a distinction between an owner-led company and a corporation. One of the greatest stories that I remember was your story, actually. I think it was, Glenn, when you were acquired by a corporation and they had to reset your expectations about where the power and the power dynamics sat, right?
Yeah.
Corporations are very different to owner-led companies, right? And this is a book for owner-led companies because I say that in a corporation, you've got the board and the shareholders to hold you accountable. owner-led companies have freedom, okay? But the
Yeah.
problem, freedom is awesome, and that's why we want to do entrepreneurship. But the problem is, with that freedom, we end up being impatient and undisciplined. So we're impulsive risk takers. So what I've really tried to do through the book is to really ask the question as well, if you're competing against corporations, is there a strategic opportunity for owner-led companies to create a distinction, a difference perhaps, that they can work on? So back to the flywheel for the better team. To that point, I've tried to speak about soul and a soulful business, because a corporation can't have a soul. Okay, so yeah, everyone knows what I'm going to say when it comes to a better team. Well, pick A players and treat them well and pay them well and do the good stuff and they'll turn out well. And then everything will be hunky-dory. And, that is true to an extent, but through the lens of an owner-led company, I overlay the concept of soul, right? And it's somewhat connected or inspired by Bo Burlingham's Small Giants, where he talks about mojo. But it is in a small owner-led company, you can have this soulfulness that a corporation could never have. So in the flywheel for a better team, start by picking A players who are infused with passion. And I'm talking about what I call curious achievers. These people who are responsible and they're inquiring. If you do that, you can't help but build high-performing teams with soul, and then you can't help but have higher impact work, higher efficiency, better results. You get a reputation as a better place to work. You replenish and grow the talent pipeline, and then you hire A players infused with passion. That illustrates the distinction between the doom loop for better team, or a bigger team doom loop, and a better team flywheel. Any questions or comments on that? Do you want me to go through the others?
Yeah, I'd love you to go through the others. I think you're exactly
Yeah.
right. I mean, I think I'll speak for Glenn, but I think we experience that really consistently, right? And I think that my example I was giving you a little bit ago about growing 100 million is exactly that, right? We're hiring the wrong people because we're trying to search for get to the number, and
Yeah.
then just unwinds. It's so counterproductive. Where what you're really saying is that be really more thoughtful about bringing the right people into the organization. I love the soulful thing, because I think we know what that looks like. We can feel it. I think we know as coaches, we walk into a business and work with leadership team that's got soul. Man, you could feel it, and they're just, you'd love working with them. And then you go work with ones that don't, and you're like, oh boy, they're just missing it, right? So I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think those teams that we see are the teams that have they have a purpose. They share a purpose. They're there for a reason, and they're there to do something bigger than themselves, like something grander, but for the right reasons. Not, again, I just go back to, and I was just actually talking with a prospect this afternoon that said, it's those companies that I go and talk to the entrepreneur and they say, well, I want to have an X million dollar business by X date. Like that's my big, hairy, audacious goal. And I told this CEO, I said, those are the people that I don't want to work with.
Yeah.
This CEO was someone who their big, hairy, audacious goal was to create a national company so that they could positively impact people's lives at work. They were an HR advisory business. They're like, that's exciting to me. I would want to help you build that business because you're doing it for the right reasons. And I said, then if you do it for the right reasons, I still maintain that you can't help but to be successful and grow.
I think the distinction, what this book has really made me do is appreciate or think about the distinction again between a company and a corporation. Pardon me, an owner-led company and a corporation.
Yep.
Because when we're in a company, we think, an owner-led company, we're thinking to ourselves, the corporations have all the resources, they have all the power. There is nothing I can do to compete against them. But I reckon it's perhaps the other way, because what I'm encouraging people to do is say, actually, you have superpowers that corporations never could have. Who wants to work in a corporation and be treated as just a number? Nobody, right? And so there's some real things that we can do and understand as owner-led companies across each of these areas to say, actually, the mid-market owner-led companies are the powerhouse, the engine of the economy. This is where people really want to work. This is the companies that are making a difference.
Yeah.
All right, Brett, I have to ask this question because you told us this, you just mentioned this a little while ago. So the company that you were with that said that had a BHAG, creating a company that had a $10 billion with a B market cap, was that an owner-led company?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was. It was, but they were listed on the stock exchange. And that's a really important point because in the book I talk about, in fact, I'm going to give you an example. Do you know a guy called, or have you heard of a guy called Mark Markson? Mike Markson, excuse me, Mike Markson. No,
I don't think I have.
I
Not a name?
apologize.
No.
I apologize to him if I've got the name slightly wrong. So
All right.
he was the first CEO, first board member, and 1/3 shareholder of Apple,
Oh,
right? Way back in the day. It's kind of the
Okay.
untold story, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
he comes into Apple and had a very successful career and was helping Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak to build something. And so he gets in there, and clearly we know the stories about Steve Jobs being an impulsive risk taker, impatient and undisciplined. Okay. And so after a while, this gets incredibly frustrating with his tempers and all of the challenges. And so he says, and I quote, "We need adult supervision. Adult supervision." So they decide to bring in John Scully, marketing director at Pepsi, as the famous story goes. Now, John comes in and runs the business like a corporation. Okay. Before that, it was being run like an owner-led company. John comes in, runs it like a corporation with a singular focus on bigger is better. We've got to go for as many SKUs as we want. And then, of course, it turns to custard. And so then Steve Jobs comes back and then runs it again like an owner-led company. So I think that irrespective of the size, you can run it like an owner-led company. There's a white paper that's out by the famous Silicon Valley investor Paul Graham, where he talks about the difference between owner-led or founder-led companies and the general market. And I think the difference, it's like 1,500% difference. So that's a very long way to answer your comment on your question. I think that founder or owner-led companies, irrespective of their structure, can still apply this principle.
Yeah. So when does a company lose its soul?
That's a good question.
I kind of wonder because
that might be the next book.
No, I talk about it in the book. They lose their soul when you try to emulate a corporation, right? So when you try to build a bigger team, because a corporation can work with a bigger team without any problem. A corporation is actually designed to have mediocrity at scale. They have the systems and process, the guidelines to be able to do that. A corporation is designed to have transactional relationships with customers and have an offering that is good enough. What kind of company would sell Christmas presents to children that break the very same day and not even be concerned about it? I'm not naming a company. A company doesn't come to mind, but only a corporation could legitimately and confidently do that regularly. So I think that the more that you focus on bigger, the more that you try to emulate everything that a corporation does, the more that your soul slowly erodes. So it's not a line. I think it just happens bit by bit. And then suddenly you wake up and you're like, what's going on here?
You probably don't even know what's happening.
You probably don't even know it's happening, but it's all the little things. And that's why I'm kind of trying to help people to appreciate what does it actually mean in the mindset. So very quickly, do you want to go through these other doom loops?
Yeah, would love to.
Yeah, I guess, please.
Yeah. Okay. So doom loop for bigger customers. What I need is more customers. I'm going to go back to the phrase I mentioned, which is transactional relationships. Corporations are very good at transactional relationships because they've got the scale. Owner-led companies are looking for something more meaningful, right? So bigger doom loop. First of all, we target new customer growth. Therefore, if we're focused entirely on transactional relationships, targeting new customer growth, we can't help but meet but not exceed customer expectations. If we meet but not exceed customer expectations, we can't help but build transactional relationships where it's easy for them to get out. That means that we get minimal long-term value, the total length and value of a customer per customer, minimal LTV per customer. Then we have minimal profit and per fixed cost to reinvest back into the business. So we need to continue to invest. So then our answer is bigger. So we go back and target new customer growth. Inversely, on the flywheel, we have a focus on expanding value for existing customers at 12 o'clock. If we do that, we can't help but meet and exceed our customer expectations. Then we build loyal relationships with customers who refer others, increase our long-term value per customer, and reduce our customer acquisition cost. We then grow our profit per fixed cost, and then we focused on expanding value. So it's a question in the customers section. Are we trying to do everything to get new customers? And that is the focus of our attention. And then once we get new customers, they fall into the machine that the entrepreneur, the salespeople, perhaps they don't care about as much. Or are we expanding the value for our existing customers? Any questions about customers?
Yeah, I love that. So let's just dig into that a little bit more. So it's funny. I was just with a potential client this morning or this afternoon also, and they have one big customer that's probably 90% of their revenue, right? And they've done a nice job of expanding that relationship. But talk a little bit about kind of, what you just talked about now is really, I think, serving your current customers versus going chasing new ones, right? Serving those customers and growing those customer relationships, better offerings, I think is really what you're talking about. So talk about that where somebody that's, maybe they're codependent or they've got a vast majority of their business running through a smaller segment of customers, and they're looking at how do we de-risk or spread some of our risk out so that we can, if a key relationship leaves, right? Some of these relationships, one person leaves and we're at risk, right? So what does that look like as you think about that within the context of the book?
Obviously, one customer, 90% of the revenue is a massive risk. There's no doubt. And we don't need to dig into that necessarily. But I start by saying that this is about mindset, right? This is whereas the other books were instructional or prescriptive, this is about the mindset. It doesn't mean that you can't take on new customers, first of all. What it means is, what is the value that you're bringing to customers? Because if you're focused on bigger, you can end up in transactional relationships where you're not really worried about the customers that you got. You're enamored with the new customers that you can bring on. Now, advocacy is a word that I break apart in this chapter, where I'm saying advocacy is the goal, because one of our customers is the largest, I will say, /best real estate company in Australia. And they sell a house, right? You don't sell a house every day. It is a transactional relationship by its very nature. So how does this apply? And I specifically kind of single them out. And if that is the nature of your business model, then think about customer advocacy. So what can you do to have better customers so that those customers with trust and loyalty will build advocacy? Because advocacy doesn't just happen. It's a function of having both trust and loyalty together so that you can build customer advocacy. So for those people, they could go out and tell people, this is the company that you need to talk to. Yes, that's customer referrals. But if they're doing it as an advocate, if they're voicing it, then that's one of the ways I'm looking at that through there.
Okay. Love that.
Yeah. All right, Brad. Well, why don't you take us next? I think it's offerings, right?
Yep. So the bigger offering doom loop. So customers is different to offerings. So we start by invest to sell more products that we can't be the best at. Jim Collins, right, in his Hedgehog talks about what can you do better than any other organization? Well, if we're currently selling push bikes, let's get in and sell drinks, because everyone who has a push bike, has a drink, and then also they eat. So we should sell food. And then they also need knives and forks. So let's sell knives and forks. You get my point, right? You get these offerings to be so wide and thin at things that you just can't be the best at. If you do that, well, it's natural that you have poor execution. You don't have the competencies. What happens? Then you can't help but have disappointing results. And then your profit drops, per fixed cost. What's your answer? You respond with bigger growth plans. We need to bring on more and more offerings, but you can't be the best at it. So you end up in a me too. So customers are just not impressed whatsoever. So you end up in this commodity zone where you're less unique and your offering is not evolving. Instead, what we want is compounding differentiation. And we do that by way of swim lanes, right? We continue over time, year after year, to evolve and become more and more and more distinct or different from the competition. And so inversely, the flywheel. So we invest in what we can do better than any other organization. Execute with unwavering focus, the results improve. We grow that offering, and then we grow the profit per fixed cost, and then we go back and invest. So it's a way to continue to own the market. Now, it is deeply connected to strategy, but it is, again, I come back to, this is about mindset. If there's no questions on that, I'm going to go to the financials.
Yeah, let's do it.
Bigger financials doom loop. So where do you spend money in your business? The old saying, I don't know if it's common outside of Australia, but the old saying is that entrepreneurs will chase the shiny things, right? There's a bird here that chases the shiny thing. It's I think called a magpie or a bowerbird. So they will just go on all the shiny things. You go to their nest and it's just, so if an idea comes past an entrepreneur, they'll be interested in it. If it's an investment, right, we want to avoid that. We want to have more clarity. So invest there, or it starts with an undisciplined investment to grow bigger. What happens if you are undisciplined in your investment? Well, you can't help but have an undisciplined management of the business and new investments, which therefore can't help but generate poor business returns. And then you react without understanding because you haven't done the work up front. And then you begin leaning towards a new idea or fad or direction. There's another new thing that pops up. And so you have undisciplined investment in that. So how do we work toward that? Well, we want to not be in the quadrant of a busy owner or a cash poor entrepreneur or the working rich, but instead a strategic investor. So without going through all of that, the flywheel for better financials, invest in the 3 flywheels previously mentioned: better teams, better customers, better offerings. That's where you should place your investments.
Yeah.
Can't help but maximize results using that approach, generate superior returns, and then apply disciplined investment criteria. And that's very much what this Better Financials chapter is about. And then reinvesting a part of it into the business, a part of it into your personal wealth, and then a part of it to fund your lifestyle. And that's the Better Financials flywheel.
Fantastic. I really like how you taking it through the book, and I'm glad you shared it with how you came upon putting it into the doom loop and the flywheel concepts, because I think it really helps clarify it for people.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. But I think I have one more question, and I think John can ask you our signature closing question. You've written 3 books now, right? And Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better is the most recent. First one, Made to Thrive, and then Onboarded. What's the line that goes through those 3 books for you as a business coach and as a former head of company entrepreneur that made you and, bring the passion to saying, hey, I want to write this book, and I want to write the next one, and I want to write the next one?
I think that at a very practical level, I just couldn't find a book that answered that question. So Made to Thrive, I kept looking and couldn't find a book that explicitly said, this is the role of a CEO. So at the time, 3 Way, Metronomics, even the scaling ups were very good at saying, this is what you must do to your business. It's excellent at that. But it didn't say, well, what is my role? So I would be working with people and they'd be doing the sales function. And I'm like, no, you got to do the CEO function. And I just couldn't find a book that I could give to people to say, this is
Yeah.
what you've got to do in your role. And then the same for Onboarded, like Top Grading. And we also strongly recommend Who by Jeff Smart, Brad
Yep.
Smart's son. That's another fantastic. So these are fantastic hiring resources, but the data was just too compelling, and I couldn't find a really good book that explicitly detailed the importance of onboarding, especially for the mid-market, in a really simple way. There was lots of books that spoke to, if you're the candidate, what do you do? But not for, I guess, an owner-led company. And then bigger isn't better. Same kind of thing. There just wasn't a book that I could find that really addressed this issue where people are always saying bigger, 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 but they're focusing on the end goal, but not the compounding, which is the really important thing to get you there.
Yeah. All right,
John,
you ready for
wanna take us
you
home?
ready for our final question? So this is about the doom loop, which
I feel like I need to put my seatbelt on.
No, you're all right. You'll be
You
all
got
right.
this.
So if you were writing the CEO playbook and we wanted to be able to avoid the avoid the doom loop, what advice or best practices would you advise? What 3 things would you advise CEOs that they should do to help to stay from getting in the doom loop or to get themselves out of the doom loop?
I'm very impressed by Shannon Susko talking about the quantity of reading that she did when she was a CEO. And I'm going to misquote her. She was reading X books per week, right? What was it?
Yeah.
A book a week or something?
It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot. Yeah.
In the madness that is that. So the first thing I would say is it's much easier to learn from other people's mistakes than it is to create your own mistakes. And it's much less expensive on many fronts. So the first job to be done to avoid it is to find the best curated list. Don't learn, someone said to me the other day, don't learn from ChatGPT and TikTok videos on how to be a CEO, right? Find the people who've done it before. Find the best practice, the Jim Collins Good to Greats, the Pat Lencioni's work, a lot of those kind of things, and really deeply understand them as fast as you can practically consume them. I think scorecards, whilst Onboarded was about onboarding, really it's about scorecards and the importance and the business case for writing scorecards. So I would say whether it's whatever book or resource you get, like you've got to get scorecards right. And especially when you overlay that with the functional perspective of the organization. I can remember learning about the function accountability chart many years ago, and I got it, but I didn't really get it, if that makes sense. And so I think that getting scorecards through the functional chart. And then I think hire slowly, fire quickly, which is somewhat a bit of a marriage of the first two, but you've got to focus relentlessly on cohesion. 100% A player leadership team that is cohesive.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. Solid advice. Brad, I have to tell you, one of my clients once told me, they said, Glenn, I wish you, this is before I was a metronomics coach, they said, I wish you had given me Made to Thrive before you gave me Scaling Up.
Wow.
Just because that's awesome. Yeah, and it really is. And I think to me, when I start working with CEOs, one of the first things we start doing, right, is saying, well, what's your score for scorecards? Like, what's the CEO scorecard? And I always give them that. He's like, here it is. Every time I've laid it out for someone, for any CEO, I've yet said, well, what do you think? Is there anything missing here? They're like, nope. All right, what here aren't you doing? And then what are you doing? Because if you are doing it, then you're doing other people's jobs.
Yeah.
Brad, I really appreciate you taking the time with John and I. And we talked about a lot. We covered a lot of ground, but at the same time, I'll tell anyone that we just scratched the surface really of a lot of the great learning and value in your book. And you make a great point about, Shannon and leaders. Leaders are learners, and cohesive leadership teams learn together. We know that as coaches. So I really appreciate you sharing everything you did from your books. And I would encourage anybody listening to read them all. And again, thanks for your time. John?
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. I really appreciate it. It was great to get your insights and actually think about those as it relates to some of my clients and kind of where they're at. It's great stuff. And I'm going to make sure to get your books in front of them shortly. So good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, John. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, really enjoy it. And to our listeners, if any of you are experiencing any of those doom loops that we talked about, or would love to feel the power of the flywheels that Brad talked about, all three of us are very experienced business coaches within the metronomic system. Feel free to reach out to any one of the three of us and definitely grab Brad's books for yourself and your leadership team. Thanks, Brad.